The Indifferent Wonder of an Edible Place is the third game made by Studio Oleamingus, based on the stories told in Dubious Splendor by Mir Umar Hassan. A source material with some fame derived from the fact it was the first work to cause questions over authorial rights in India due to tampering before its publication. This game is also the one that drew me to playing Studio Oleamingus' games in the first place. The title seemed very interesting, and once I saw there were multiple of a similar style, I thought I'd tackle them all to see how they fared. Sadly, I have to say I was a little underwhelmed with this one. After the improvement from the second game to the first, I expected another upward step from this game, but sadly it wasn't as good as I hoped it would be. Don't get me wrong, it isn't bad, but I had my expectations at a higher level. This game seems to be more a blend of the style of the first and second games. It reverts back to the storytelling method of the first game, with you reading about a certain scenario and then seeing it displayed in huge proportion within a strangely designed room. The rooms themselves had more content in them than in the first game, but I didn't get a ton of chance to explore these rooms because the centerpiece shatters when you get close to it and the story moves on. The story this time is more of a poem than prose, and is a lament from a man who is a building eater. He destroys buildings as his job, but has had his home destroyed himself, and mourns the loss of the memories and the sentimental value from the places he is made to destroy and from his own home. The story in this one is probably the clearest of all three games, and whilst it does have a couple of spelling wobbles at the beginning, it's soundly written and much easier to understand. There are a few of those stray niche pieces of vocab in there, such as the word somnambulant, which popped up on literally the first page of the poem, but those are much rarer in this game, which eases the flow of reading a lot more. There is fractionally more in terms of gameplay in this one, however. There is a system where you have to detect edible blocks by activating the TVs to tell you which block to look for, then holding right mouse to bring up a crosshair and direction marker to tell you where to find the block. It's easy to operate, and when you find it the crosshair goes red and you have the option to eat or not eat the block. Not eating the block does nothing, the story just won't progress if you don't eat it. Saying that, I sure hope you love the sound of people chewing, because if that makes you uncomfortable, then you're in for a bad day at the office with this game. It's the partner sound effect to every block you eat, so buck up and enjoy that one. This game saw fit to install invisible walls, so I couldn't throw myself off the edge of the map again. And there are about 4 or 5 areas that you play in, one of them being the main building you're working on eating, and the others being the representative areas for the storytelling. You get a bit more space to run around than you did in the other 2 games, and there's an actual gameplay mechanic involved in this game, so it ups the second game on that at least. The visuals were mostly as good as standard, but weirdly the main tower area seemed to load in at a lower quality than the other rooms. I'm not sure if this was meant to be a stylistic choice, but it made me very confused that I had my settings wrong, even though I put them on Ultra. The rest of the game and the other rooms were fine and looked as good as ever though, so I'm not sure what happened there really. The sound effects and ambient noise in this one were again really good and fitting, other than maybe that eating noise. This game is shorter than the other 2 as well. It took me 12.5 minutes from start to end, including time to change my graphics settings quality from Ultra to high to low and back to Ultra. I am a fast reader though, so I'd set the playtime at about 15 minutes tops. Even still, that's not tons, and there wasn't much more spectacular in the game to make up for the time loss. The block finding mechanic probably made the development process a lot more difficult than it was in the first 2, but you don't use it all that much, and it's not like the blocks are impossible to find. Really, my overall assessment is that it's better than the first game, but not as good as the second game. The story is easier to understand than both of them, but it lacks the added component that the mystery of the story in the second game had. It has more of a gameplay mechanic than either of the other 2, but it was short, plus it adopted back the representative model thing that the first game did that I wasn't too keen on. The time spent on that could have been used for more gameplay, which would have helped balance out the game nicely. The story wasn't narrated and didn't have imagery, but it didn't need it because it was more comprehensible. But the overall game was shorter and over very quick, and the visuals took a dip for the area that was inhabited for most of the game, which was a bit strange. Overall, I will give The Indifferent Wonder of an Edible Place a 5.5 out of 10. I'll take this part to do a total summary of all 3 games. Game 1 had good ideas but questionable execution. I found it hard to engage with large walls of text and a different story with hard-to-grasp names and unstable grammar and spelling on the other side of every door. And the models of objects looked very nice, but there wasn't a lot more to the game. Game 2 had a decent story with a tangible target of finding out who you are at the end of it. The never-ending loop style was a little weird because I felt like I was missing something by having to quit the game myself, but the dialogue options made the story a lot more interactable, as did the verbal narration and images. The physical world to transition through was a good visual break from the story and served the purpose of getting you to the next part of the story. Again, little gameplay, and the story is written in the author's sometimes confusing style, but it was more engaging. Game 3 had slightly more of a gameplay element in the edible block identification, and the story was written more understandably, but the poem verses were broken up by more object models in rooms that you had minimal space to explore in because the game was continued by proximity to the main object. It was shorter than the prior two and had a strange graphic drop in the main area that happened nowhere else in the game. All the games have many similarities in visual style and writing style, but the differing topics between them lead to different execution, and whilst all of them are story-based, the change in story content required to project has led to 3 different experiences. All the topics are fairly serious and symbolic, looking at perspective, colonialism, and erasure of history, and each game gets its point across well enough, though as you progress from first game to third game you see less assimilation and imagery covering the main point. They're decent games to say they were only made by 2 people, and language barriers exist between both the source material and the creators and audience, but if you're a fan of stories and nice visuals, then by all means give them a try and see yourself what you think.